Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Yuh Line Niou is a former New York State Assembly member for the 65th District and an overall incredible human. I had the pleasure of speaking with Yuh Line today about her immigrant reality and experience growing up in small towns in Idaho, Oregon, and Texas. It was insightful to hear about her involvement in politics and government, especially with the work I have been doing recently with Make Us Visible Florida. It was truly an honor to speak with Yuh Line, and I am grateful to share in these conversations. If you enjoyed the podcast, please rate it on your platform of choice and share it with others. If you would like to support with a donation to help keep this podcast going, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan. Now, on with the show. Hello, Yuh Line. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Mimi.
Oh my goodness. I have been very excited to meet you. And before we jump in and go over all the crazy things that we're going to talk about, shout out to our mutual friend, Dr. Mark Chang, who connected us on the Twitter sphere.
I'm so excited.
Yes. And I have to admit, I check that like every few weeks or so. So it was a good thing that I caught that message. But I noticed that you're actually pretty proficient and prolific on the Twitter. And you're quite good at like just conversing and being just very like yourself and have a great following. Is it just a platform you've always taken to? Or because my views on social media are pretty negative. So,
I mean, look, I think that social media has its place. But I think that I come from it from a place of communication, access, transparency to government, to, your elected officials, your, community. I was talking to a couple of friends the other day and we were discussing, the goods, the bads, the evils of social media.
Yeah.
But yesterday, I had gone to an incredible talk actually by, my friend Maurice, who is the head of the Working Families Party. And he said something that was very moving to me about social media. And it was just basically, meeting people where they're at, right? And how that is like the joy of organizing. And I think that for me, I definitely utilize social media as an organizing tool. It's not perfect. It's, really brutal. Some of the stuff that people say to me, obviously, have been very ugly, negative, racist, xenophobic. But I will say that, the community that I've made online, the people that we've been able to reach out to who, later on we meet in real life, like on the campaign trail or anywhere else. And in the organizing spaces, I feel like there's a connection and we wouldn't have reached them, otherwise. Right. And I think that this is how we communicate now in this generation. Right. We're not out here running, I guess, newsprint to like hand to one person only,
Yeah, we don't have paper boys anymore. So
yeah. And I think that, we do some places, but I think that for us, it's like, we go to where the people are. Like we have to meet people where they're at. And I think that is part of why I think it's so important to be on social media, even with the hurt and the hatred that sometimes I get. And so I think that it's really part of organizing and it's a part of reaching people and communicating with your community. So that's why it's so important.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, especially coming from the background of always being like, social media, because that's just my natural instinct. And having been somewhat in the public eye as well, having kind of just not really loving all of the negative that comes with it, but Like, for instance,
100.
here we are sitting here together, right? Because literally that's where there was a connectivity. So I really admire and value hearing that reinforcement, like there can be good and positive, and we can use these tools for positive
100.
things, right?
And Mark and I really only know each other through social media.
Right.
Right. And now you and I, we have this moment, but like this is the first time we're actually seeing each other face to face on a social. This Zoom is actually kind of a social media platform as well. It's not like an open source social media.
Right,
it's like a more of a, but like we're talking to one another face to face in a chat, and then we're going to be broadcasting it out to folks. And I think that this is the first time we're seeing each other by face, but it's all due to social media that we were able to have this time. And I think that we have different ways of communicating. It's not like by USPS mail or like a donkey postal service, but like I do think that that was also at that time the way to socialize, and now it's social media. And I wasn't always on social media. You had asked that question earlier, but I started using Twitter actually my first year in office, when I really wanted to be able to get news out to people. And messaging. I think that at that time, there weren't like many elected officials on Twitter. There wasn't a lot of that like hype. Like people were on it to like, be like, hey, there's a community town hall like happening. So then they started to have these rules, right? So in the middle of having social media, they started to have like on like a Twitter profile, et cetera, they started to have these rules because people obviously, I think, more so when Bernie, Senator Warren, they were having the presidential, and then also like when AOC was elected, I think that there was a huge like social media change in the way that people perceive social media and politics. And then of course Donald Trump, when he was on social media and would literally make policy decisions based off of Twitter. And so I just think that there was a moment where I think people were seeing that there was personal stuff and then there was political things, and then some things should be government communique and some things should be personal communique. And so then I also had to create like a government profile. Then the rules changed officially after I had already created one to where you had to have a government profile if you were a government official, if you were going to put anything work like things, and so you could of course talk about policy and all these things on your personal, but like it's just that if you're there's a government profile for government communications, and then there was a personal profile where you couldn't block people, can do things like there's like a lot of different rules that ethics gave us to be able to like navigate the system, which is all real and new. Sorry. Yes. That was a tongue twister. But yeah, it was all new. And so these regulations were new. And we were kind of like these like initial groundbreakers in some aspects of utilizing it for a certain purpose. Right. And I think that, using it in a way to actually talk to people, like I would like ask people questions about, what is your day like? Did you, do this thing? Or, how much does childcare cost for you? Just having that kind of like input is really good for policy, I think, in the end, or even to just understand what people are going through.
Yeah, I think so. But I was, trying to do my little bit of research and like, okay, let me look into like, where is Yuh Line from and all of this. And I was fascinated to kind of read, like, you were born in Taiwan, but obviously like as an infant, pretty much raised in the United States, and you moved to some pretty obscure places and then ended up in Oregon. Is that correct? And what was your childhood
all
like?
Over,
like,
actually.
How did it, were you moving like frequently, or was it just like in your earlier formative years?
So my parents are very immigrant parents. I
understand
the immigrant story. It's always different, but I think, when my parents came to America, this is a story that they tell us as kids. They came to America with 6 suitcases, a 6-month-old baby, $1,000 in their pockets, and that was it. And they could only bring 6 suitcases because they could each have 2, and I could have 2 because they bought a ticket for me. But it was, how they arrived in America. And my dad, he had to choose, um, you know, based off of educational opportunities where we were going to land as a family. So my dad, he got into two different schools, but one school offered his small family housing. And so housing was the big decision maker for my parents. And, because they get student housing in some places, but he had a family and it was different for him. And he wanted to have my mom and me with him, instead of like in a student dorm. So he had a dorming situation that would allow for like a, small family to live. And that would be at the University of Idaho.
I admit I've never been to Idaho, so
look. I will say that my parents like picked some super like random places to be. So I mean, this is the American story, right? The immigrant story. They went where the educational opportunities were. So my dad got a very good scholarship, educational opportunities, papers from the University of Idaho. And this was when America was, trying to make sure that they could entice brilliant young people from places during the Ronald Reagan administration, actually, especially from Taiwan, who wanted to go into engineering. And so my father was one of those young people who took that opportunity. So we ended up in Idaho, where my sister was born. Okay. And then my parents moved to Beaverton, Oregon. So my dad could go to graduate school following his, other graduate degree, I guess, at Idaho. So he went to start his PhD in Oregon, in Beaverton, Oregon. So it's another little, it's a suburb of Portland, technically, right. I mean, one would say.
it's close to a bigger quote unquote city, but it's out there still. I mean, right. How old were you when you were in Beaverton?
So I was, I think, I want to say like I maybe 3.
Oh, okay. So
7.
before, so school, you hadn't even started really school. Yeah.
Cognizant of stuff. I mean,
right.
So my parents also asked my grandmother to come to the States to help to take care of us because in Idaho, we had a very scary daycare situation that happened.
Oh.
And my parents were like, we can't, this is scary and maybe racist. And so
I mean,
so there's neo-Nazis up there. I don't know. There's like a lot of interesting things in Idaho. But I think that my parents had a scary moment where I was a baby in a daycare situation that was kind of unsafe. And so my mom and dad decided that they were going to have my grandma come and watch me. So that's what she did. And then when my mom got pregnant with my sister, it was double duty.
Yes. I mean, it's scary enough to put an infant or like a 1-year-old, the really young kids. I mean, it's, in general, letting go of your kids and putting them out there, but putting like really small children that can't even speak, I think in daycare is already scary. And then to have kind of an experience where, like you said, there was racism or discrimination and it was unsafe. Like that's, thank goodness you're fine.
No, I'm fine. Yes, obviously, I don't remember any of it.
Right. But I mean, for your parents' trauma,
they 100%. Were just like, ooh, not the thing. so they had a little bit of fear in their first like initial time here. And I think that, one of the things that my mom noted for herself was also language. Access was so important. And she was a nurse at the time because, when she and my dad first immigrated here, they both thought they could go to school. My mom thought that they could both go to school and they were just so excited. about that part. But then, you know, immigrant reality, obviously, somebody needs to make money, and that way we can eat as a family.
Eating's important.
Yeah, my dad's scholarship and stipend didn't go as far as they thought. And I still remember them telling me stories about how they just always wish that they had another $100 more, just
Oh.
every single paycheck. They're like, if we just got to another $100 more, we'd be doing so well,
Oh.
but like every time they got, a little bit more, they were like, oh, there's so many more needs. I need just another $100 more. And
Yes,
so,
yes.
it was really hard at first, but I think my parents, like, they never made me feel like I needed for anything or wanted for anything. And so they were just amazing, in sheltering us from a lot of those hard decision making things that they had
Yeah,
to decide on.
right.
And my mom, so she went to work as a nurse, night shifts mostly at the
Mhm.
time, and then took care of me in the day, or opposite, whatever it was that she was able to get shifts on. And
Mhm.
that's how they got started here. And
Right.
then
And then for
when
you, yeah, for you going to school then,
mhm,
was there like kind of a protectiveness being that, your parents had all these experiences of you going of the daycare and everything, like later on going to school. What was that experience like for you? And what was the school like? Because Beaverton doesn't strike me as a very diverse community at that time. Not sure if it is even now, because actually outside of the Portland area, there is still to this day quite a lot of interesting factions of neo-Nazis and racist humans.
yeah.
So like what was it like
well
for you in school, or did you
well, the
feel
neo-Nazis were in Moscow, Idaho, and like that
Mhm.
Spokane area. That was like, that Coeur
Yes.
d'Alene area is like a hub
Yes.
for, the KKK and the neo-Nazis. And
Hmm.
like, do you remember that there was a whole news story of what do they call themselves? The Patriot Front, like coming down and trying to like go to Pride or something into the, rally, and they got arrested. So anyway, so it was so terrifying. But I in Oregon, I mean, I don't really recall a lot of the school stuff. I just remember, and that was actually harder when we moved to El Paso. So my brother was
Okay.
born in Oregon, in Beaverton.
Okay.
He actually, ironically, I kid you not, lives. He actually bought a place almost a block and a half or 3 blocks away from our old rental home
Oh
in Beaverton,
wow.
Oregon.
Back to the hood, the original
Yeah,
hood of his
it's
birthplace.
I mean, I would never have thought. And so I went to go and see his place for the first time, just like, I don't know, I think a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, I went to go and see his place for the first time. And then he was just like, do you want to go and see your old elementary school? And I was like, I still remember what it looked like in my memory, but I don't
Right.
really remember what my own experience was per
Right.
se.
Yeah, it's
I
like
think
images.
Yeah, I mean, it was like it's a very striking school because it's literally like a half circle. Like,
Okay.
in my head, it was just like going to this place that was shaped like a half circle. I remembered the park more than I remembered the school,
Mm.
and I think because I moved when I was 6, going on 7, to El Paso, Texas.
Okay, so El
The
Paso is where
more
you went to school.
Well, no, we went to school in both, but like I more remember,
Right,
my
because you're in higher elementary and
yeah, well, you're in
yeah.
first grade, and you kind
Yeah.
of start having those like memories of school. But
Yeah.
before in Portland, Oregon, like that whole like or Beaverton, Oregon time,
Yeah.
it was just it was it was the people that we already kind of knew, like kids I had gone
Yeah.
to school with initially, and I think I didn't have as many um, difficulties
Mhm.
fitting in and things like that because of the fact that I wasn't very aware that I didn't. I think,
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us have that experience, and usually it's more upon reflection where some of these things kind of are brought to our attention, that like things that stand out in terms of not fitting in and maybe not feeling it in that moment, but then realizing something you did feel and what that that connectivity is. A lot of things I've noticed talking to a lot of people of color, people from different backgrounds, is like, yeah, I didn't really, I didn't feel, oppressed as a child. But when you think back, there are very significant memories that made you feel other or that made you feel a certain way. And so in El Paso, I guess you had more of your elementary school experience. Was there something more outstanding that made you feel that way? Or was that also kind of a nice memory in terms of, yeah, I just remember what the school looked like. And
No, not at all, actually. So that was the thing. Like in El Paso, it was like totally striking, because I didn't know like how their systems worked, like even getting into the lunch line and using tickets. I still remember my first time, like, even getting lunch, and I was like we were on a reduced lunch meal plan because,
right.
Obviously we were a certain income level. And so my parents, they just like, they did all the paperwork and all that. And of course, my mom said that we were bilingual, which is true. But then they put us in Spanish and English class because that was the only bilingual that they had in concept in El Paso, Texas.
Mandarin and
no, because it's a border town, so like they were just like, Spanish and English class. So then I was so confused, and I was like, do I speak English? And then I didn't even know. Like I was like, I didn't understand what was going on to where I couldn't understand what anyone was saying, and I was freaking out, because my English also when I was younger, like when I first started school, this is something that was striking. In Oregon, I didn't know I didn't understand conceptually that English and Chinese were like actually like, I mean, I understood that there were two separate languages, but like I didn't understand
you just speak.
It wasn't like cognizant. I wasn't cognizant of like the way that language worked. I just knew that I could communicate with these folks, but my English was learned mostly from television. I learned Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street were my pathways to learning English. And I still remember like the significance of the PBS programming for Mr. Rogers, because for me, it was eye-opening. And the reason why he caught my attention so hard was because, before at the very opening of every single time, he, walks into his house, and then changes his clothes. He takes off his outside shoes,
yes,
to put on inside shoes.
Yes.
And like, I still was just like, he's just like us. He's just like me. And that was like the moment, that was a cultural barrier broken for me, to where I could learn English from him. And so I didn't realize that until, that was one of those moments where you're reflecting back, right? I didn't realize that was the trigger for me of like accepting him as my teacher.
Oh my gosh. I love that. Because I loved Mr. Rogers, obviously. For me, it's the opposite though, because I grew up speaking English, and I wish there was like a Chinese Mr. Rogers so that I could have been better speaker in, another language, but that is incredible, that connectivity of him doing that. Cause I remember, he takes off his jacket and he hangs it, and then he takes off his shoes, and that never would have occurred to me until you brought that up. Wow.
Right. Like the indoor shoes. And it just made me feel like accepted and like we are part of the same community, and we do the same things and the same ritual things. And, because I'm on the spectrum, that ritual was so important to me. And it grabbed me. Right. And my parents were just like, is she speaking English? She like recognizes letters, words, like she was just going. And so, when I went to school, I didn't really have that problem. But then when I was in El Paso and they put me in Spanish English class, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I speak English.
Right.
And I was so scared and startled, and I didn't have the language even or the concept of understanding like how to even advocate for myself in that scenario. So they figured it out. We got placed into a different class, but it was a moment, right? And it kind 100%. Of, when you are not in the same class on the day one with a certain group of kids, you're also like kind of lost. And so I remember feeling very lost and very alienated.
Yeah.
And then I was the only Asian kid in my entire school. And so it was frightening to me, and in El Paso, they didn't really have a huge Asian American community. And
I wouldn't imagine so.
No, when we got there, there was like 6 families that we found and I went to church with and knew and grew up with in the end. And so I still remember all their names too. Like all my friends. Yeah.
They're probably following you on Twitter.
Well, so it's really funny. Like a lot of the folks we still do communicate. And
that's nice.
Yeah, we became even better friends over the time. We've gone through ups and downs of like loss and stuff, but like we've always kept in touch. So it's weird when you grow up with a group of kids who are just having this singularly unique experience in a place. There's a 100%. Lot larger. Yeah, there's so many more Asian Americans there now, but it was such a small group of folks, at first.
Yeah.
And then the only Chinese folks we met were then through church. Right. So, it was a really different way of, I think, seeing the world, having a different lens. When, now here in New York, I see, that there was a lot of different ways that I could have grown up, but I wouldn't trade it now.
Yeah, no, I think our past experiences definitely make us who we are today. But I love that you also, like you said, keep in touch, because there is something very unique about those in which you share childhood memories with and experiences, sure. Especially, not that it was traumatic, but especially something that was so striking and so impactful, like that there's like no one else can understand what it was like at that time in that place, but that unit, right? And so it's like you've been through something really special. And I have to ask if, like, having even though you don't remember it, like having housing provided for you and your family and that opportunity there, and having these experiences in language with education, having like these things where things were overlooked, right? Like that could have been a very simple thing. One, they could have just spoken to you to find out if you were bilingual in Spanish and English, but there's so much overlooked in our system. And then, fast forward to you being this powerhouse of an elected official and just doing so many amazing things, housing being something that's super important to you, can have a platform. I wonder if there's like a connectivity from your past to present and those experiences that have made you take on the things that you've been taking on in public office, but also continuing to work on. I have to say, in my little research world, I saw like 100% rating by Planned Parenthood and 0% by the NRA. And I was like, we're going to get along just fine. I was like, thank you, Mark, for the intro. I'll take it from here. We'll be in an echo chamber today. We're good. I need this confirmation bias. I need to be, sometimes you just need to be with those that are, in your space that make you feel good. So very excited to kind of talk to you about the things that you're passionate about, but I thought you would find that amusing.
I was like, wow, that is me. So I will say that, you brought up something that I do think about all the time. My parents and their experience, their immigrant experience, my immigrant experience growing up, and then, I guess the lenses that I see through definitely shaped my policy making and definitely shaped my worldview on what I think would make us a better country, a better place. And, I think my mom and my dad, both of them brought so much of my thinking. And I still remember talking to them about, my policy. And, sometimes they're like, oh, you're so extreme on this thing. And I was like, yeah, but you did it. You're the one. You got me there.
Right. This is because of you.
Because of you. Everything's our parents' fault. But my mom, actually, she was a nurse. And she's somebody who, really saw the impacts of the WIC program early on when when we first came to America, I was a WIC baby. My sister was a WIC baby. My brother was a WIC baby. She saw.
Can you expand on what that is for our
Yeah.
listeners and
So,
myself?
Women, Infant, and Children's Program. It's a huge, an amazing social program that allows for new moms, babies, and children to be able to get a certain kind of subsidy, so that their kids don't go hungry. We had a very high maternal mortality rate and high infant death rate when in America in the 70s, 80s. And so there was an amazing program that was put together, much like, a lot of different social programs. I think that we saw immediate changes in how people valued, because a lot of things that we talk about, we're talking about budgeting, when we're talking about where we put money as a government, we're talking about all of these things. Budgets are values documents. And if you value people, if you value moms, if you value, children, if you value babies, like being able to not go hungry or have the right nutrition, then you come up with a program like WIC, and WIC is incredibly successful. Shot down, infant mortality rates and maternal mortality rates, was able to provide resources for so many people in a time when, people were needing the most help, right? And I mean, when you're a new mom, you're particularly vulnerable to all kinds of things, right? And when you're raising an infant and formula is so expensive, like you need to be able to have those things, and they help you to they don't do like huge amounts of things too. It's not just like making sure that somebody has formula and diapers, which is huge and important, but it's also like teaching new moms how to latch, right? And like going through like conversations of like, this is what happens, like, and you have all of these resources at your disposal. My mom, she's a maternity nurse, and so one of the things that she noticed was how how important it was for everybody to sign on to WIC, and everybody used to be on WIC, and now there's more and more limits and regulations, and Donald Trump just tried to end the program, right? So it was very striking to her that these social programs were very important, and she was so torn up about people regulating on WIC, right? And I think that it was something where she's like, everybody should have access. And that struck me, right? Because when you look at these social programs that we're asking for, universal health care, making sure that people can have housing, right? It's where she comes from. And so when she's like, oh, why do you say this? And I'm like, Mom, do you remember what you told me about how I'm a WIC baby? And how like, and UT, my brother and my sister were both on WIC, and I think that there's just a huge significance. And my mom, she didn't see, the way that there was stigma around the policy. She didn't understand why it was seen as negative when it was such a positive, right?
Right.
And she was always trying to break down those barriers for that one particular program because she was a nurse. And she was a maternity nurse, and she saw the benefits of that program. And, at that same time, do you remember in the early 90s when people started to coin that term of welfare queen and all these things, she didn't agree with that kind of sentiment, and it was so racist, right? That kind of wording, that kind of usage on social programming when it came to actually using government benefits that everybody should be accessing. And so she was always very cognizant of the stigma that it brought, and also trying to break that down as a nurse to make sure that everybody could use that program, to make sure that babies were born healthy and that, moms could get, the things that they needed to stay alive, for one, understand what, what happens like after birth, taking care of, folks pre-birth, and I think
just that support.
it's all that support that was so important. And so, this is one thing that really broke down, I think, a lot of the thinking, to how I think about policy. Then we came up with certain amazing policies when I was a young adult, like TANF. We saw like, temporary assistance for needy families come in. That's what we call TANF. We saw like, different other social programs that were able to help kids get, we saw children's savings accounts start to like pop up here and there in different states. We saw, how, we needed to talk a little bit more about the high cost of healthcare. And we started to talk even more about, what it costs to, go to school. And, why is it that higher education, when my dad first came to America, like this is the programming that he got, right?
Exactly.
And it wasn't until there was, this huge change and shift in how accessible academia was that, we had a harder time affording higher education, right? I think there's like a lot of talk right now online about how, higher education in America used to be super, super, super accessible, right? Until the civil rights movement, until, everybody could go to school, until there was, actually opportunities to go to school, and they wanted to find a different way to keep people of color out. And so, it's so important for us to, kind of see where our policy minds are shaped, right? And where our worldview is shaped. And, my dad was a environmental person. He's a chemist and he's a material science engineer, but he always thought about all of these things in an environmental lens. And I grew up with 50 things kids can do to save the planet in my back pocket. I honestly,
I love it.
I swear to you, I did not realize until looking back that my dad was such an enviro. I still remember how he did certain things that I was just like, are you doing that because we're poor? Like, what are you, why did you put a brick in the toilet? Like, why did you put a milk carton in the toilet to like make this so that there's less water in there? Like my poo won't flush, what is going on, Dad? Like, it's because we don't want to like waste water. He was just like, well, first off, it's good for the environment not to waste water. Like, if you need more water to flush your poo, like, how big are your poos? Drink more water. Where my dad was like this huge enviro, right? He would do things that I didn't conceptually understand till I was much older. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's so ahead of his times. We had we had solar paneling even when we were renting. Like, it was just like one of those things. My dad was very, very, very cognizant of, how to sustainably live. There was, things that we ate that were, I was like, Dad, bleh, can we just buy something at the store? And he was just like, we're going to make this, it's making things time. And just like, what is happening? Why did you tie a plastic baggie to the shower? So like he would catch all of the drips, like, so, and then he would use that. 100%. We were in a rental home, so like there was things that were always leaking here or there, or like something was not right, and he would like take the time to fix them. Always making sure that, there was a way to be able to, get conserving water, get all of the little drips, and instead of like using pesticides, because he was a chemist and he knew how harmful they were and he didn't want his children around pesticides, to catch ants, we used shaving cream.
Wow. Does that work?
It was, yes.
Oh,
yes,
it's good to know.
They get drawn into them and then they get trapped in there. And then he just scoops it up and then throws them outside, and then it was a, like, totally natural shaving cream.
Brilliant. This is so brilliant. I'm like, wait a minute. Let me take notes here. Totally not podcast related. Shaving cream for ants. Got it.
Oh, 100%.
Gonna need your dad's I'm gonna need to get all this information.
I was just like, I was startled, like, I was like, this is, this is so crazy to think back and
Yeah.
look back and be like, this is why my dad did what he did. And now, looking at what, he would get so mad at me for using, because as kids, man, we would be using pen on everything. You remember, like, you would draw on your Converse sneakers or like
Yeah.
on your hands.
Yeah.
Like, my dad was like, do you realize your skin is like the biggest organ in your body? And if do you know what chemically is inside of these things? And he was like, let me break it down for you in the lab. Let's go. Like, he would like pour out the ink in my pens and then be like, this is like, there was stuff in there that was like,
wow,
weird, just like, this is cancer causing, this is cancer causing.
Oh my gosh.
He was just like, don't draw on your skin. And I just remember like jotting down numbers or like writing notes on my hand or like remembering, oh, Wednesday, do this assignment,
Yes.
And my dad was just like, why do you do that? Do you know how much chemical you're absorbing into your skin? And I was just like, and instead of my dad, like, instead of, actually, just like lecturing, he was like, we're going to go and do a science experiment.
Yes,
I was like,
he's a scientist through and through. That's amazing. I mean, I'm thinking back, like, I don't think my dad had any cognizance of any of the strange things that you've mentioned in terms of like catching water, but he grew up with nothing, right? So just feeling how wasteful we are as Americans, like, I think it was more of that. I don't think he obviously loves the environment, but I don't think he understood. He hated when I wrote on my hand, but he definitely didn't understand it's because there's chemicals. He just knew it was like, this looks bad. So we got a lot of the same lessons, but I didn't get any of the science laboratory, explanations and getting to see all that is fascinating. It's super, super fascinating. But, kind of going back to policy, it's just, it's really interesting, like you said, to kind of draw that line of like, well, this is why. And, I know you've said this before, other elected officials, we just need more elected officials from various backgrounds to kind of bring that perspective. Otherwise, our majority elected officials, come from a place where they don't understand. They never grew up having, the WIC program or any of these things that you mentioned, and why it's so good for humanity and why it's not just a handout to quote unquote lazy people. Like, that pisses me off so much when I hear that all the time, because it's like, have you met some of the people who are now giving back to society in this amazing way that wouldn't have gotten there because they also didn't have the same opportunity, right? I think there's just this huge disconnect of what people think people deserve and where they're coming from, like the lack of empathy of understanding where that everyone comes from a different starting place, right? And it's so commendable. So I do have to ask, like, clearly you were taught a lot of interesting lessons growing up and all of this was embedded into you, but what made you decide, I'm going to go into one of what I consider to be the harshest environments ever? Like, I spent the last 2 years as an advocate in Make Us Visible, Florida, working on one legislative bill, like one piece of legislation. And I'm going to tell you, when this is over, I am done. Like, I do not know why anyone would do this like all the time. I commend you. And I think, wow, what a sacrifice to be doing this day in and day out. And selfishly, like, just tell me what's the secret to getting shit done in politics, because it's crazy. But what was your motivation to actually say, here's what I'm going to do with all the information that I have and all the passion? Like, why did you decide to put yourself through that? Because it's not easy. That's for sure.
I mean, I think it was my parents and like the worldview that I grew up with. And I think that, for me, I was always very frustrated. And I think that a lot of times people talk about this and, I've said the same thing so many times. So I think, it comes out, in a lot of different venues. No, it doesn't.
Oh, okay.
But it just comes out in a lot of different venues. Maybe people won't get that ways.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. I'd say, it's like the same words, right, to describe a scenario. But
sometimes we need to hear it over and over, though. So please
I agree. I mean, one of the things that I think, as like a young person, we grow up with, in America, just like thinking rules and regulations, these things is happening to us, right? And we don't think that we can have any say over changing them, right? And that's I don't know. I think it's really great that you're already advocating on changing a bill. But it probably took you a little bit of time to even get to a place where you felt like what you had to say was important, and maybe your experience on this particular issue is important, and for me, it took me a moment, but I think that I definitely thought that, uh, I wanted a bird's eye view of how government works so I can change a lot of things because, or at least like know how to um, change things from uh, an outside perspective, even if I couldn't get to the inside perspective, right? Because I felt like there were so many things that were unfair, right? The way that certain rules and regulations impacted people, and I didn't think that there was anything I could do to change it, And I think that's something that a lot of people think. That's a lot of it. We think that rules, regulations, all this stuff is ephemeral, that we can't really impact it, can't really touch it, can't change it. It just happens to us, right? But then I realized that that's a myth that we tell ourselves. It's a complete story that we make up. And it's not because we wanted to make it up. It's because there are people who are in power who tell us that story because they don't want us to know what they know, which is that they can change the rules and the regulations to benefit them. And that we should be able to change the rules and regulations to make sure that we also, our communities, should be able to be, also existing and alive and healthy and whole. And I think that the powers that be, they don't want us to change that. The statistics that I even tweeted just yesterday, right? There are more multimillionaires in Congress than there are people of color. Does that not say something, right? And then the rules and the regulations that happen, do you think that they're going to regulate for them, or do you think that they're going to regulate for us? So we need a seat at the table in order to change things. And I became an intern in the Washington State Legislature. So my parents moved to Vancouver, Washington, another place that is a little off the map. But so I would consider it also a suburb of Portland, but it's the no income tax, no sales tax portion.
Oh, right.
Yeah. No income tax and no sales taxes. The border of Oregon and Washington. Did you ever hear about that?
Yeah.
So the I already lost my train of thought, but okay, got it back. But so the way that I kind of felt about changing things was to, I guess, at least understand how the government worked in order to be able to change how the government worked from the outside, I thought. Because I was like, I wanted to be an advocate. I wanted to be, somebody who was able to at least understand like who to talk to and when. And so I thought maybe an internship at the Washington State Legislature would help me to see that. I had always wanted to be a lawyer. I thought that, things were so unfair, some of the things that my parents went through, and they needed like somebody to help to have language access or to have legal access, et cetera, to understand like how to, be able to convey or communicate some of the things that happened to them that were unfair. And then I realized that, no, I don't, after my internship, I realized I was like, I don't want to just, defend or argue about why this law is not fair or something like that. I didn't want to just like defend the law. I wanted to change the law. I wanted to make things a little bit more equitable and fair. And so I really took an interest in policy making and policy writing. And so that's kind of the avenue that I pursued. So I ended up working for some amazing legislators. Senator Regala was one of them. She really took me under her wing. She was an amazing legislator out in Washington State. She was at the time for the party, the whip of that caucus or conference, as they call it over there, or caucus over there. We call it conference, they call it caucus. So it's a little confusing.
It is very confusing.
Yeah, the different names that people call things, like we call ourselves the Assembly and they call themselves the House of Representatives over there. But she was in the Senate, and so they have the same name. Senators have the same name. The People's House always changes. So then, I also worked for Representative Eileen Cody. She was the healthcare chair at the time in the House, and she was amazing. And we were able to do a lot of work together. And I was her staffer for several years. And then I went on to work for a group called the Statewide Poverty, Action Network. And it was, they hated the acronym. It was called SPAN. They were like, it sounds like spam, but it's Statewide Poverty Action Network. And it was an anti-poverty group that really worked on regulating, predatory products like payday lending or stopping check cashers from skirting certain regulations. And so it became kind of another place where I was able to learn, how to look at policy. I had an amazing mentor there named Tony Lee. He was kind of this great thinker when it came to social programs. So he was one of the first advocates on TANF. He was one of the first advocates on trying to make it so that we had, certain programs that were able to help needy families. And I think his background obviously was actually, it's funny to think, but his background was actually advocating for Catholic churches before he went on to found with the speaker a group called the Fremont Public Association, which then became Solid Ground, which then had an advocacy arm called Statewide Poverty Action Network. And so he was one of the founders of it, and really started honing in on how to really dig into the deep root causes of poverty. And, Martin Luther King always said, that, it's a man-made construct, right? Poverty is man-made. And so then we can also unmake it, right? So I think it's something that we can really change. And Tony really believed that. And I was able to really learn a lot from him on that policy front. I was lucky to have a lot of great mentors. Sharon Tomiko Santos is another amazing mentor. She is still a representative out in Washington State. She was one of the first Asian American women ever elected to any office on the state level. And I looked up to her so much. I mean, she's somebody I call mom. She is, somebody who has a deep policy mind, who looks at all of the angles, looks at the layers of policy, is willing to peel it back and then look at it for what it truly is. And she taught me really how to, analyze and strategize around policy. And I think that, the real secret, again, is that there is no secret to accessing government. It's the fact that we are told that we can't, right? And so I learned that from her. I learned that from Uncle Bob Santos, her husband, who was a huge civil rights organizer and leader in Seattle, Washington. And he took me under his wing, and he was a huge mentor to me, that leadership styles can be different and you can lead from anywhere you're at. And he always would tell me this, and I think it opened up my eyes to how we can make change from wherever we are. And I think that is how, I really decided that this is the way that I think, we can change things. There was a lack of representation. Instead of just waiting, sometimes it's okay to not wait anymore.
Yeah, I just the utmost respect for that because like I said, like the very small preview into that world has me, I wouldn't say jaded is the word, but I
Yeah, it
am
hurts, right? I
yeah,
mean,
it's
sometimes
painful.
it hurts. It,
It's
it it
painful,
really
yeah.
it really
So,
is. You know,
so
you think that the things that you care about, people might also care about. But
yeah, and then like you go in and you did get so much done. Does it then change your worldview of okay, I can make that difference. Or does it, or is there like a little bit of defeat of like, well, does it even matter? Like my husband and I, we love The Wire. We would watch it ever so often. And I'm like, you know what? I can't
oh
watch it
yeah,
anymore because it makes me feel like,
it's
what's
too
the point?
real.
The system's broken. Nothing's going to change no matter what you do. I was like, you know what? It's like a little too real. Right. That's the thing. I
Yeah.
used to enjoy it as a show. And then now I'm just like, gosh, it's like you're making all these gains. Like I'm in Florida, everybody knows this. And it's, wow, you're fighting for this one thing in education, but like everything else is taking 800 steps backwards. And I'm like, but I got to take that one step forward if I'm going to take any, because that's still the one step. And then we tackle them, one by one kind of thing. Right. But like, how does, yeah, how do you see things now that you have really spent quite like was it 6 years doing being an elected official, like just how much time that does it make you more hopeful or does it make you more frustrated, I guess?
It's both. I
Yeah.
mean, yes, I was, I was an elected for 3 terms, 6 years in the state assembly. But I also, worked in policy for I think like 2 decades now. I started as an intern and I just kept on working in policy. And I think that, in different roles, I felt different frustrations and also certain satisfaction in
Yeah.
different ways. And I saw like changes in certain aspects in certain ways. And I think that those, I always, like I said, what Uncle Bob said was that you can leave from anywhere. And I think that, there's nothing at all wrong with focusing on one piece of policy that you really care about and pushing it through because everybody is working on different things at, different times. And I think that, you are a person and you can't like expect to, take on the whole world and do everything. But I think like that's the thing. Like when you start to see things and you're like, oh, I could, pull this lever and maybe there's something will shake here, or I can pull this lever and maybe something will shake here. But I'm so focused on trying to like win this prize and this machine and this thing, and like, and
Yeah.
so like, maybe I'll just pull all of them, but like, then like, what are your chances, and I think, people are, taking, on, different things in different ways, but it all depends on your own personal capacity. Obviously, I don't think that you should ever feel like you have to do everything, but I do think, I mean, I think that we always put that on ourselves though, right? As
Yeah.
leaders, but I think that, the frustrating parts are that we don't have enough people at the table to move things in our direction sometimes. But then, like, sometimes you have to think maybe I should be the person at the table then because nobody else is at the table right now. But then, like maybe you have to have that thought, right? And like
Yeah.
it's hard sometimes. I mean, it sucks to be a first. It sucks to be an only. People think like, oh my God, you're the first and only. This is so cool, and you're making history. But it's like, I don't want to make history. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
how am I the first and only when it's like 2017, And then
Mm-hmm.
like, what? And then it's like, how long is that going to be? And they call it
Yeah.
paving the road because the road fucking sucks. Like,
Yes.
it needs paving.
Yes. Paving the
It's like,
road, right?
it's like, it sucks, It's like, I don't want to be
Yeah.
the one to like trip, fall, scrape my knee, whatever. Like, I don't, it sucks. It sucks.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
it
No, you touched on something that I wish we had like another hour to kind of get into, and maybe you'll promise to come back and we can continue conversation. But like there is so much with that. Like, oh, you're the first and only, and it's like well, look at the time that we're in, and supposedly we're such an advanced species that has like overcome so much, and we've got Zoom and all these things, and AI is already, on its way. Like, so it's like we couldn't even evolve to be like the best version of ourselves as humans before AI starts stepping in. So like, but it's like, oh, look how far we've come, but it's kind of like, no, but look how far we've got to go, right? And there is so much with you that's been the first and the only, and it's kind of like even just looking at AAPI as a whole and mainstream media, and the fact that this breakout film of Everything Everywhere All at Once is like, oh my gosh, they're going to be the first, and it's like, wow, it just feels like a little depressing that it's now that this is finally a thing, because I had like a moment in Hollywood in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I'm like, wow, it only took 23 years, so it's frustrating, right? But the thing is, we need the first and the only. We need the first one to get us going and to pave the road. Like you said, it's like unfortunate, but it has to be someone. And I personally am very glad that someone happens to be you, because it's like, well, who else is going to do it? And in the same way your mentor you just described, inspired you, I'm sure you are doing that for so many, and hopefully that trickle,
So.
that effect happens, and it's just, but it is kind of, this is why I asked that question, which is like, oh, you're in it, so how exciting is it to see things get done? But then on the flip side, you're like, nothing's getting done on this end. And so it would definitely be problematic for me. Yeah, it's both, right? And both can be true. Yeah, both can be true. It's not ever really an either or. But again, you're going to have to promise to come back because we're almost at our hour. But I wanted to know like what you do for downtime and enjoyment, because so much of your life is giving to others and giving to society and what you do and everything. But like, what do you do to kind of relax and unwind?
So I've been really bad about that. So I was really bad. This is my new phase of life, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can sleep. I can eat what I want. I can, it's actually startling how badly I did not take care of myself. And you don't see it while you're in it. Because I think I put a lot of responsibility on myself, whether it's on me or not, or whether or not it's something that should be there or not. I did, and I think that, I think that it was hard to break out of that, for sure. And I think, still, I still do it, and it's very hard not to, I guess, think that every single thing is not like life or death, and so I've been very bad, but I read a lot now that I have the time, because I love reading, and it was something that I didn't realize that I wasn't doing enough of, because I read so fast that I can read a lot of material in a short period of time. I didn't realize that I had replaced the things that I love reading with, a bunch of
policy and bills and legislation, which let me tell you,
I also love reading.
Yeah, but there's something with the brain that needs a disconnect from that type of thought, right? Yeah. I'm guilty as I give advice that I don't necessarily take as well. But yeah, self-care, these are the things in the last several years, ever since the pandemic as well. Like we've learned to say, wow, we need to take that step back and realize like what is a priority, because we do need you to keep fighting the fight. And so you need to be healthy to do so. And so I may send you some text reminders on this now that we've met. And the teacher side of me.
Water.
Good. Yes, we talked
water.
We talked about this.
I didn't drink water because I would get up in the morning and I would take my morning pee and then I wouldn't drink enough water to pee again the rest of the day. because I was so afraid of actually taking a break anytime. Because what if I was late to this meeting? What if I was doing that? It just, it was so hard on my body, and I didn't realize that. So in the last 3 weeks, I worked out. I don't know. It's like, it's really, I haven't really had a chance to work out, to take care of myself in so long. And during this pandemic, I was so worried about people dying. And, in New York, we saw, people literally in refrigerated trucks. I couldn't, process it all without thinking, if I don't do this one thing, somebody's going to get hurt. If I don't like, it was burnout. It was like total, like you couldn't sleep for more than an hour or else somebody's going to die. Like that was the mentality, It's like if we weren't out there giving out meals, people were going to go hungry. If we weren't going to provide masks, and people were going to not be able to have masks. And like, what if somebody's, got a chronic illness or somebody's disabled? Like it was just so much on myself, and I think in that time I was really glad that I was in office, but I was also like, working to a point where I don't think I fully physically recovered, so I'm trying to do these things that are a mental break and a physical break. I play a lot of Sudoku. I know that's weird, but I play a lot of Sudoku.
That's not weird at all. I mean, it was a really popular thing for a reason. I don't think you're alone in this.
I play a lot of Sudoku. I read a lot, and like things like that is like my mental and physical break, from a lot of things. Yeah.
Well, please take care of yourself, and please drink water, and please continue to do that because, like I said, I'm sure whatever lies ahead, you will be out there fighting the fight for us again and doing all of that. But absolutely. So I'm sure you hear it all the time, but I'm in Florida. I'm not in New York, but it doesn't matter. Like you doing what you're doing is super inspiring and super moving and helpful for those of us that are trying to also do things wherever we're at, like you said. And it's important to have leaders like you out there and leaders that are the first and the only, and hopefully will not be. You'll definitely trailblaze for so many others. So thank you for that. Thank you for the conversation. I have like 20% of the things that I wanted to talk to you about off my list. So you're going to have to agree to come back. And
I just want to learn martial arts from you. I'm just waiting to like actually like do a video of like, we're gonna do horse dance for 30 minutes.
We can do that. I think you say that until we start, and in minute 1, you're like, okay, forget I said let's do horse dance for 30 minutes. As my students will tell you, we'll start with 30 seconds first.
I can't even do it for 5 seconds.
You're like all in. I see this is so telling of you. You're like all in them. You're like, I want to do it for 30 minutes. I was like, oh, wow. Okay.
I want to watch you do it for 30 minutes.
That's not that exciting either, trust me. But you are such a delight. It's such an honor to have met you and spoken to you today. Hopefully you'll be back on the show sometime. Is there anything else you want to add that I didn't? But again, we'll talk again.
No, I really appreciate it. I mean, sorry I was like rambling on a little bit, but I just definitely feel like it was like fun to talk to you, So
100%.
It all the time.
All right. Well, we'll talk soon. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.